In this video, we're going to be going over the nest function. I have previously set up my pattern. You can see right here on the screen. This is what we call an edge-to-edge or an all-over quilt pattern. You can see that I have it nested right here in between the rows. Everything kind of nests in together. So when I take a step back, it looks like an all-over quilt pattern, not individual rows. And we did that in the previous all-over quilt video that we previously ran. Now what we're going to do is we are going to set up our nest function. So what I want you to imagine is I have run these 3 rows. I pressed the green start key. I pressed check mark to go to the start point. The pattern, or the machine then moved over to the start of the pattern. It did its bobbin pull up. It ran all the way down row number 1. I then tied it off. It then came down to row number 2. It ran all the way down this row. It did its tie off. It then ran down all the way down row number 3. So 3 individual rows. So now I have this pattern that is sewn out on my quilt all the way across left to right and the depth of my throat. What I need to do now is I need to roll my quilt. Right now your quilt is locked in on your rollers. Take up roller, belly bar, they all have your quilt kind of locked in place. We have told the machine exactly where our pattern box or our quilt area is. So anytime I unlock any of those rollers, I am now moving the canvas that I want to stitch on. And if I move that canvas, I need to tell the system where I have moved the canvas to, where I've moved my quilt area, where I've moved my pattern box to. So especially when I want my rows to nest up inside each other like this one currently does, I need to tell the system where I moved to. So what I'm going to do first is here on the home screen, you can see in the upper left corner, I'm on the home function. In the lower right area, I have these hearts that are kind of nested inside each other. I'm going to press the nest function. Under nest, I have a back button. I have a move function. I then have a check mark and a cancel button. Notice right here down the bottom, it will tell me what I'm supposed to be doing right there. Select and mark your nesting point. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my crosshair or my needle at about the bottom of the pattern that I previously sewn out. You can see that I'm not exactly at the bottom. I just want to be somewhat close. The important piece is that I'm able to nest my 2 patterns together. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my chalk and I'm going to mark my chalk on my needle right there. So I've actually marked my quilt exactly where that point currently is. When I say check mark, it's going to actually ask me to then roll my quilt. Okay, so I marked it. I marked that area already. I haven't moved my machine. I have just marked it. Okay, so now I'm going to unlock my rollers. Okay, we're going to unlock both of those, and we're then going to roll our quilt. We're going to roll, 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 and we're going to roll our quilt several times. You'll notice on the screen nothing's moving because I'm not moving the machine. I am only rolling the quilt. Okay, so once my quilt is rolled, everything is locked in. It is important that that mark that I made, that mark does not get rolled up into the take-up roller. That mark has to be exposed for me to tell the system where my pattern needs to stitch to. Now this pattern is especially important because I want my nesting area to come up and I want it to run up right here. So what I actually want to have exposed, I want to have about this area still exposed when I roll up my quilt. Okay? So I want that area to still be exposed. And that's what I've done here is I've exposed that respective area for those respective pieces. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to tell the system where I moved that point to. Okay? So we're going to say check mark. Now you can notice right here, move the machine to your nesting point. You can see it right there. Okay? So I'm going to move my machine right up to that point that I previously set, and yep, I'm about right there. And I'm going to say check mark, and not about right there. I want to be as precise as possible. So I'm actually looking at my needle, and I'm looking at the mark that I made, those 2 pieces in correlation with each other. I'm trying to get them set exactly where I set it previously. Check mark. Okay, now what this is showing me is the grayed out area that you see up here is what has already been quilted. And this black area right here is what's going to be or to be quilted. Now I like this spacing. You can see that everything seems to nest inside of each other, seems to fit pretty well. But let's say it didn't. Let's say it was just one row that I was running. Let's say it was only this row right here that had ran, and then this next row that's right here is the row that's to be run. Again, grayed out is already done. Black or denser, bolder is what's to be done. So what I can do to adjust my spacing is I have two options. These two options right here. I'm going to start with this option here, and then we will do the other option. This option is where you can just type in what your spacing actually is. So remember that I set up my patterns previously at the very beginning. What I did is 7 repeats across, 3 repeats down, and then I personally set my spacing already to -0.7. And that's why it's showing me -0.7 right here, because in the repeat function, I set my spacing to be -0.7. So that's why it's going to recall here. Now, I really wouldn't want to change this on an everyday basis, because what this is going to do is I'm going to have 3 rows that have a spacing of -0.7, and then my next row would be a spacing of, let's say I did 0.5. That row would be a spacing of 0.5, but my next 3 repeats, they would still be a spacing of -0.7. And I would actually want to do -0.5. So when I say check mark there, you can see how I'm actually spaced apart a little bit more right here. Okay? Now naturally, again, I wouldn't want to do that. I would want to leave it at -0.7 because I have already set these 3 rows, their spacing, to be 0.7, -0.7. I wouldn't want to change that. But that does show you how you can come along and you can actually change your spacing very quickly on the piece. Now this requires you to kind of do a little bit of a guesstimate. I go into that other screen, I say, I think that I want to do a -0.7 spacing, and then I see how it looks. There is another function that will allow you to visually set your spacing, and that's by pressing this button that's right here. Okay, so the button's currently highlighted. You can see that it's orange, but nothing's happening, and nothing popped up on the screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab onto my handlebars, and I'm going to start to move the pattern. Notice what happens when I start to move my machine. I am literally moving my machine, and you can see how that black bolded line, or the black bolded pattern, is actually moving as I move my machine. And I could even move this left, I could even move it right. What I've done is I have locked my machine and my pattern together. So wherever I move my machine to, my pattern will move to that location as well. So this is where I can grab onto my handlebars and kind of move around just a little bit and say, you know what? I want to be exactly right there. That's the spacing that I like. And I turn it off. I'm going to press the same button again. So right here, I'm going to press the button again to turn off. Now notice I can move my machine now. The pattern doesn't move with me. The pattern stays in the same location. Those are the 2 options that you can use to set your nesting. Now remember that if I have set my repeat up previously with several rows, I set my spacing already. I shouldn't ever have to adjust that spacing again until I'm all the way finished. I should be able to set my nesting point, roll my quilt, show it where my nesting point is, and press go again. It's really that simple. Once I'm complete and I say, yes, I like how that looks for my nesting, I'm going to say check mark right here. Check mark, and now my pattern will roll. Now one thing that I like to do, or my pattern will run, one thing that I like to do is I use my crosshairs and make sure that I'm not going to run into my take-up lever or my take-up bar here in the back, which I'm not, and I'm going to bring it all the way forward, and I want to make sure that my pattern doesn't run into my belly bar here in the front, and I don't. You can see I have that distance there as well. That's just a really quick check that I like to do to make sure that when I was setting up that nest that I didn't mistakenly set it back too far or set it forward too far, and then my pattern would hit my belly or take-up roller. This is the nest function. Very straightforward, very easy to use. I just recommend to follow those steps, setting your point, adjusting your spacing if you need to. You should only have to adjust your spacing if you only have 1 row of pattern there on the screen. After I've nested, I can press the green light to run. I can press my check mark. my pattern will move back to the back of the very first start point. It will do its automatic needle up. And then I can say OK after I pulled up the bobbin thread to be able to run the pattern. It will do the tie off stitches right here, tie off, tie off, tie off, and then it will begin to run the pattern. This has been the nesting function. Thank you for watching the Quilt Easy video. And come back to our Facebook page for more training.